In 2014, a 30-year-old woman in a black turtleneck appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine. The headline called her the world's youngest self-made female billionaire. Her name was Elizabeth Holmes. Her company, Theranos, claimed to have invented a revolutionary medical technology, a small machine that could run hundreds of blood tests from just a single drop of blood. No needles, no vials, no labs, just a finger prick. Investors believed her. The most famous names in American business put nearly $1 billion into Theranos. Henry Kissinger sat on her board. George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, championed her. Rupert Murdoch was her largest single investor. The Walgreens drugstore chain agreed to put Theranos blood testing machines in stores nationwide. At its peak, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes, who owned half the company, was personally worth $4.5 billion. Here is what nobody outside the company knew. The technology didn't work. It had never worked. For 15 years, Elizabeth Holmes had been running one of the most audacious frauds in modern history, and it could have actually killed people. Today, I'm telling that full story. The Stanford dropout with a vision, the investors who believed without checking, the whistleblower employees who tried to warn the world, the journalist who broke the case, the trial that ended with prison, and the brutal lessons hiding inside the rise and collapse of a $9 billion lie. Welcome to Earnings Per Page. Wild money stories, honest finance history. Hit subscribe. Let's begin. First, the founder. Elizabeth Holmes grew up in Washington, D.C., the daughter of accomplished government and corporate parents. From childhood, she was obsessed with one idea: becoming the next Steve Jobs. Stories from her early years describe a relentlessly ambitious child who declared she would become a billionaire by age 30. She enrolled at Stanford in 2002 to study chemical engineering. She dropped out at 19 to start a company. The pitch: a wearable patch that could detect illnesses through skin contact, then deliver drugs automatically. Her professors told her the technology was scientifically impossible. She started the company anyway. She called it Theranos, a combination of the words therapy and diagnosis. Over the next 5 years, the technology evolved from a patch to a desktop machine, the Edison, that supposedly performed full blood panels from a single drop. Holmes cultivated a deliberate Steve Jobs imitation: the black turtleneck, the intense unblinking stare, the deliberately deepened voice, which, multiple former employees later confirmed, was a fabricated affectation she adopted to be taken seriously. She gave dramatic TED-style talks. She told audiences that Theranos would democratize healthcare and make blood testing accessible to everyone. The story was perfect. The press repeated it without verification for over a decade. Lesson 1. How she fooled the smartest investors in the country. Here is the genuinely shocking part. The investors who put money into Theranos were among the most respected names in American business: Larry Ellison, Rupert Murdoch, the Walton family of Walmart, the DeVos family, Henry Kissinger, George Shultz. Yet none of them ever saw the technology work. Holmes refused to allow due diligence on the device itself. She claimed the technology was a trade secret. Anyone wanting to invest had to sign confidentiality agreements. Demonstrations of the device were carefully staged, and as later evidence revealed, the machine often didn't actually run the tests being shown. The samples were secretly sent to other labs that used standard equipment. Holmes had figured out the most powerful insight of modern Silicon Valley fundraising. Investors don't really evaluate technology, they evaluate stories and other investors. Once Kissinger backed her, Murdoch felt safe to invest. Once Murdoch invested, the Walton family followed. Each big name became validation for the next. Nobody actually checked. Lesson 2. The technology didn't work. Behind the scenes, Theranos engineers were desperate. The Edison machine was unreliable. It produced inconsistent results. Different blood samples from the same patient produced different test results, sometimes wildly different. For some tests, the machine simply could not work at the volume of blood Theranos was claiming. There wasn't enough sample to run reliable assays. So Theranos quietly did something extraordinary. For the blood tests it actually had to deliver to Walgreens customers, to real patients. Theranos used Siemens-made machines that they had modified to handle smaller samples. The Edison, the famous machine that justified the $9 billion valuation, was barely being used for actual patient testing. Customers thought they were getting cutting-edge technology. they were getting normal blood tests on diluted samples, often producing inaccurate results. Some patients were told they had serious medical conditions they didn't have. Others were missed diagnoses. The fraud wasn't just financial. It was medical. Lesson 3. The whistleblowers who knew first. Inside Theranos, young employees were horrified. One employee, Tyler Schultz, the grandson of board member George Schultz, saw the data manipulation firsthand. He confronted Elizabeth Holmes about it. He went to regulatory authorities. Theranos lawyers threatened him for years. His own grandfather sided with Holmes against him. Other employees, Erika Chung, Ian Gibbons, and others also tried to raise alarms. Ian Gibbons, the chief scientist at Theranos, died by suicide in 2013, hours before he was scheduled to give a deposition that would have potentially exposed the fraud. Theranos used aggressive legal tactics to silence whistleblowers. Holmes's boyfriend at the time, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, who was also Theranos' chief operating officer, oversaw a culture of intimidation. Employees who raised concerns were fired, sued, or threatened with lawsuits that could destroy them financially. Lesson 4. The journalist who finally broke the case. In 2015, John Carreyrou, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, began receiving tips from former Theranos employees, like Dan McCrum at the Financial Times, who would later expose Wirecard. Carreyrou spent months verifying the story. The whistleblowers were credible. The science didn't work. The technology was a fraud. On October 15, 2015, the Wall Street Journal published Carreyrou's first article. It said, plainly, that Theranos' celebrated technology didn't actually work, and that the company was using regular blood testing machines for the vast majority of its actual patient testing. Theranos denied everything. Holmes appeared on CNBC to attack the journal. She claimed the article was the work of disgruntled employees. She insisted the technology was real. Politicians and tech celebrities defended her publicly. But Carreyrou kept publishing. Each new article revealed more. By 2016, regulators were investigating. By 2018, the company was finished. The SEC charged Holmes with massive fraud. Walgreens terminated its partnership and sued. The company's lab certifications were revoked. Theranos officially dissolved in September 2018. Elizabeth Holmes, who at one point had been worth $4.5 billion on paper, was personally broke and facing federal criminal charges. Lesson 5. The trial. Elizabeth Holmes was charged with multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. The trial began in 2021 and lasted 4 months. The defense argued that Holmes had genuinely believed in the technology. She was a true believer who had been let down by her own engineers and possibly manipulated by her boyfriend Sunny Balwani. The prosecution showed the jury document after document of Holmes knowingly making false statements to investors, to Walgreens, and to patients. In January 2022, Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of fraud against investors. In November 2022, she was sentenced to over 11 years in federal prison. She began serving her sentence in 2023. Sunny Balwani was convicted separately on 12 counts and sentenced to nearly 13 years. Final lesson. The pattern is now unmistakable. Theranos fits perfectly into the pattern we've seen in 1929 LTCM FTX Wirecard, and now this story. Every single one of these collapses shares the same structural features. First, a compelling founder with a great story. Holmes had Steve Jobs' aesthetics, a Stanford dropout origin, and a mission to save lives. Sam Bankman-Fried had effective altruism and a beanbag. Marcus Brown had a turtleneck and German tech pride. Image consistently masks reality. Second, institutional support that resists scrutiny. Kissinger, Schultz, Mattis, Murdoch all defended Theranos. None of them ever saw the technology work. They trusted each other, not the data. The same dynamic protected Wirecard, FTX, LTCM, and the 1929 mania. Third, whistleblowers who get attacked instead of believed. Tyler Schultz was threatened by his own grandfather. Theranos lawyers chased journalists. The pattern is consistent across every fraud. The people telling the truth are attacked, while the people telling lies are celebrated until the math collapses. Fourth, fraud at scale requires belief at scale. Theranos didn't just need to fool a few investors. It needed to fool an entire ecosystem. Investors, partners, journalists, regulators, customers. The bigger the fraud, the more belief it required to survive. When belief is the only thing holding it together, a single credible article can bring it down. The story of Theranos is also a warning about something more important than money: Patients received inaccurate medical results based on Theranos technology. Some women were incorrectly told they had cancer. Others were missed in early diagnosis. The fraud wasn't just financial, it was medical. It is possible that people died because of decisions made based on Theranos results. We will likely never know the full toll. Right now in 2026, somewhere there is a confident founder with a great story telling investors they have invented something revolutionary. Some of those founders are the next Edison or Tesla. Others are the next Holmes. The only way to tell the difference is to demand to see the work. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Earnings Per Page. Next time I'm telling the story of Enron, the energy company that may be the OG of corporate fraud, the case that defined modern accounting law. Drop a comment with whether you believe Holmes truly thought her technology worked, or whether she always knew it was a fraud. See you in the next one.